chapter number 11. John 11. Very familiar story. A couple of observations I hope that will encourage you. Like I said, there are 57 verses here, so we will more or less paraphrase John chapter 11 that we might be able to see some things that I hope will help us. The Cliff Notes, the Spark Notes version of the story would be that Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha and the very close friend of Jesus, fell sick. And then he died. In the period between his falling sick and dying, the sisters sinned for Jesus. They believed in Jesus. They knew who he was. So they said, will you please come help? Lazarus, who you love, is sick. And Jesus didn't go. The disciples, as we'll see, they said, we're going to go. We're going to go over to Bethany. Lazarus is sick. Are you going to go take care of that? And they tarried. They waited full 4 days. Then they took off, got to Bethany. The sisters meet him on the edge of the village. Lazarus had expired. He had died. And they said, if you had only been here, why didn't you come when we sinned? If you had been here, our brother would still be alive. Not knowing, as we had the benefit of hindsight, not knowing what was coming. And Jesus said, your brother will live again. This is one of my favorite passages to go. And actually, Brother Jerry used it at Miss Lou's funeral just the other day. Sometimes he and I, when we get to do funerals together, we have to check real quick, is one of us going to use John 11? Because we've both wanted to use it before. It's also a fantastic passage to read at a graveside. Jesus said, your brother's going to live again. And they said, well, we know. On the last day of the resurrection, our brother will be raised to life. And Jesus makes a compelling statement. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he lives, will never die. And he who believes in me but dies will live forever. Then he looks at them and says, do you believe this? What a question. And they affirm their belief in what Jesus had said. And he goes, and then he goes asked to see the place where they laid him. People are weeping there. We see Jesus weep with the mourners. You know full well, you learned in Sunday school many years ago that Jewish culture would pay people to come and mourn at your funeral, right? There were people who that was their professional job. It wasn't Jesus' job. But we see the Lord of everything weeping over the loss of his friend. We see his humanity on display. And then we hear him call out. He asked to open the tomb first, and they said, hey, you don't want to go in there. You don't need to see him. Decay has started. He's going to smell pretty bad. He says, open it up. And he calls out. The same voice that said, let there be light. The same voice that called out on Mount Sinai, that spoke to Elijah. The same voice that thundered in the Jordan River Valley, this is my son in whom I am well pleased, because Jesus is one and the same with the Father. This voice said, Lazarus, come forth. And he did. What can we learn from this story as we walk through this? There's a lot we can take away. There's a lot that we need to remember. A lot that shines the light on who our Lord Jesus is. So let's sort of comb through this for a few minutes. Notice some things. Look at the first pericope, the first section of John 11. Notice simply that Jesus knows. Jesus knows. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. And then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? And he said, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to him, now listen, he's not there yet. He said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. But Jesus had spoken of his death, and they thought he meant that he was taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas called the twin, said to his disciples, the fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. A lot going on here. We need not follow the different tertiary movements of the text too far, because we'll miss the central truth. Jesus knows. When word came to Jesus, he knew. When they waited, Jesus knew what was going on. And without cell phones, without telecommunications, without instant information, as they were making their journey, Jesus knew that he had died. Jesus knows. Can I tell you something tonight? Especially since we're in a smaller group, a more intimate group. We live so often as if Jesus doesn't know what's happening, do we not? We worry. We stress. We strain over the events of life. But the Jesus who knew that Lazarus was sick and that Lazarus died and that he was going to live again, the same Jesus knows exactly what's happening in your life and in my life tonight. That's the takeaway from the inerrant, inspired, infallible word, that if this is true about Jesus then, it's true about Jesus now. And it's always going to be true about Jesus. So why do we, when a difficult circumstance happens, why do we worry so much? Well, it's in our human nature. Please don't hear what I'm, Jody, what do I always say? What I'm not saying. Jody he's asked me if he could use that a few times. He likes that. Don't hear what I'm not saying. We're creatures of the dirt, of the dust. In our own strength, we can't help but worry. We can't help but wonder. We can't help but stress and strain and be confused and be angry, be upset. But Jesus knows. He also knows all about our weakness, because the Bible tells us he was tempted and tried and faced every bit of our weakness the same way we did, yet he never sinned. Jesus is not disconnected from your reality. Jesus is not distant from your problems, from your burdens, from your worries. Hey, not distant and distracted or disconnected from your hopes and dreams and the good things that happen in life either. Jesus knows. You can imagine when they got the news that Lazarus was sick, everyone knew about his relationship with that family. Why didn't he hop up and say, where's the first train to Bethany? Where's the first mule to Bethany? How can we get there quickly? Why didn't he, like he did after his death and resurrection, why didn't he just translate over there? Why didn't he just show up? He could have done that. Jesus knows, and he knew that the Lord was using this as a moment to display his glory. All these years later, Lineville Church, what I'm telling you is, Jesus knows what you're going through, and he is using it for his glory. Whether you want him to or not, whether I want him to or not. The beautiful thing about it is we don't get a choice. We don't need a choice, because we would miss out on the marvel of grace. We need only trust that what God is doing, he knows what he's doing. Let me ask you, is there anyone better? I've asked you a version of this question before. Is there anyone better to direct the affairs of your life than Jesus Christ, the living one? You say, Ben, you don't know what I've lived through. I may not know the fullness of everyone's story in the room, although again, I say it so often, that's the beauty of getting to be your pastor. I do know you. I do know what you're struggling with. I do know what has happened in your life in some way or another, and may I continue to learn more and more about what God's doing in your life. I don't have to know every single detail to know that God is sovereign. I don't have to know every single detail to know that the great God who spoke the worlds into existence can and will and promises to form good things out of our brokenness. Dear ones, we need the reminder, because to not realize that means despair. Jesus knows. He knows. Rest in knowing. We get to see the story play out for Mary and Martha and Lazarus, but things just as beautiful and marvelous and unimaginable as what Jesus did for them in that day 2,000 years ago, listen, he's doing in your life. And we already know the very end of the story, in that way down here, far down the pathway of life, we'll be with Jesus. We'll be made complete. We'll be like him. We'll see him as he is. The Bible tells us all the beautiful things that are out there ahead of us. We know that's already there, and it will never be less than that. Jesus knows. So rest that he knows both what's happening, where you've been, where you are, where you're going, and he knows how to get you to where he is, because he knows. We keep reading as we walk through this story. What you see as we continue on, that not only does Jesus know, Jesus, well, he cares. And this next section here is that one that I was talking about. Jesus declares that I am the resurrection and the life. Look at verse 17. Jesus came. He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that he was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated at the house. Martha said, if you'd been here, I know my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. So Jesus said, your brother will rise again. Martha said, I know that he will in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Now, we're about to talk about how Jesus cares, but it's a good sort of parenthetical statement right here, that everything you and I are talking about right here in the next few minutes hinges on how you answer the question Jesus posed this dear sister. Your experience of grace, of Jesus knowing and caring, as we'll see in a minute, calling and comforting, your experience in those gifts of grace depend on how you answer the question. When Jesus looks and says, I am the resurrection and the life, and he says, do you believe this? You must believe to be able to experience him in his power. You must believe to be showered in his grace. You must believe to be held up in his mercy. You must believe to be able to take part in the great plan, the mosaic that he is putting together. You must believe. So could I ask you a question before we read a moment further? Do you believe? We skim over that a little bit sometimes. We take it for granted. Yeah, Ben, I believe. I walked the aisle at Vacation Bible School. They let me hold the Bible the next day when we pledged to the Bible. Yeah, Ben, I've been baptized. Yeah, Ben, I'm a member of this church, that church, or a bunch of churches all at the same time. Do you believe? Does your life bear the evidence of your belief? Are you submitting to Jesus on a daily basis? Are you reading his word? Are you lifting him up? And are you praying? Are you taking your problems and casting them on him? Do you trust him with your life? Or is he just a side dish in the greater scheme of things that you have over here because you were raised to? You have over here because it's convenient. It's comfortable because of your social conditioning to have a part of Jesus in your life. You'll post a verse here and there on Facebook. You have a t-shirt that says something about Jesus. You have a great little fish on the back of your car. But do you actually believe in Jesus? You should. Because he cares, because he knows, because he understands. And he's the only one who's ever done something about the problems that you are facing. He's the only one who's ever done something about the disconnect that you and I had from God. He's the only person who has the power to save me and you. Do you believe? We'll keep reading. He goes on from there, and when she had said this in verse 28, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here, he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out. They followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You see how they repeated the same thing? Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping. He was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Man, would it not have been just fantastic to be there? Would it not just been unimaginably joyful to hear people saying, "This guy's done some cool stuff, but surely he could have healed Lazarus," not knowing that they were on the very edge, the precipice of the greatest thing any of them would ever witness. We see that Jesus knows, but listen, dear ones, Jesus cares. He cares so very deeply about you that he would come to this place and experience the veil of tears that we call home, that he might rescue us from it. He cares for you so deeply that he experienced everything that you and I would ever face in this life and bore up under it so that we could come back to God. He cares about you. The difficulties in life, the confusions, sometimes I try to touch both sides, but can I just also hit the middle real quick? In the absolute average, vanilla, boring life, not on your worst days, not on your best days that I mentioned, but just in a regular day, wasn't all that bad, wasn't all that great, man, just a regular day, Jesus cares about you. He cares about you more than you and I could ever imagine. We talked a while back about one of those few statements he makes about himself. He says, "Come to me, those who are weary and heavily laden, and I'll give you rest. Take your yoke upon me, for it is easy, and my burden is light. I'll give you rest for your souls." No one, not your parents, not your husband, not your wife, not your children, not your pastor, not your best friend, not the president, not Mama Kay down in Montgomery, and nowhere in between. No one cares about you like Jesus. No one. But we, as the hymn writer told us so long ago, what peace we forfeit, what needless pain we bear. Because we don't run and carry the things that are burdening us in prayer to the Lord. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. To the God that cares about me and you. They said, "See how he loved him." Remember when Jesus stood and looked over Jerusalem and wept again? Could we make a side note really quickly? It's okay to weep, to show that you care. It's okay to be moved to tears, to a physical manifestation of your sorrow or your burden or your grief. It's okay. Jesus did it because he cared. He said, "How often I would gather Jerusalem up." He said, "I'd long to gather you up as a hen gathers her chicks. But you would not." Could I ask you something again? I'm asking you a lot tonight because I want you to sit in this text just for a minute. I want you to see what beautiful gifts are offered me and you in it. How often do you and I resist Jesus like so many did in that day? The Lord who cares and wants to lovingly wrap us up and heal us where our wounds are stinging and burning from the salt of life. He wants to wrap us up, and we won't let him. We refuse his grace because life isn't working out the way we'd like it to. We grow bitter and angry because things aren't unfolding the way we believe they should. And all the while, the Jesus that cares, who is known to weep for those he loves, he offers himself in fullness to you and to me, and we don't take him up on it. Jesus cares. When we're in Sunday school as children, we learn that The shortest verse in the Bible comes right here. Jesus wept. Would to God that we would remember as the week unfolds before us, going from this place tonight, that Jesus cares about us. But Jesus knows and Jesus cares. We need to keep reading because there's more to Jesus that he offers to us. Not only does Jesus know and care, Jesus calls. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, can we stop right there for a second? If you have your pen or highlighter, you might want to, it's an odd thing, you might want to highlight or underline. That's the first time and last time she's going to be referred to as the sister of the dead man. This is just to remind you, this man was not asleep in the tomb. This man was not hiding out behind the rocks to set up some elaborate ploy to deceive the people. She was the sister of the dead man. He'd even lost his name, his identity. He was simply another one of the dead. Martha, it says, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor. He's going to stink. He's going to smell awful because he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died. Past tense now. Do you see the shift? The man who had died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Jesus calls you and me out of the slumbering depths of our death to sin, hell, and the grave. Jesus has the only voice that can animate and quicken and make alive dead, dry bones. And he did it. When you and I confess Jesus, we sing it sometimes. Pick on Doc just a little bit. We come out and we sing Glorious Day. We often, when we do it, we start the service. We did just this past Sunday. And Doc captures that song perfectly with the energy that's required to think about being called out of the grave. We can't sing that song quietly, can we? We shouldn't. The very Word of God says that Jesus didn't whisper, even though he could have, because he's God. He could have whispered, "Hey, Lazarus, come on out." He could have just thought it, and it would have happened, but he didn't. He wanted to draw attention to the eternity-changing event that was happening before them. That the man who was died, who his family now was being referred to as the family of the dead man was about to be given his name back. The dead man was about to be given his life back. These sisters were about to be given their brother back because Jesus called him out of the grave. The Bible tells us that you and I were dead in trespasses and sins, but God. Jesus calls people out of the grave. Jesus calls us to a life of grace and mercy that we could have never had on our own. Jesus is still calling people tonight out of the grave. And that is the great mission of God here in his creation that you and I get to be a part of. Not only have we been Lazarus at one point in our lives, if we've confessed Jesus, not only are you still Lazarus if you're not in Christ, others are too. And not only did we get to see it in our own selves when we are about the mission of God among the people of God here in the creation of God, we get to see more and more Lazaruses, whatever the plural would be of Lazarus. We get to see that often because Jesus is still calling people out of the grave. And he calls me and you into that great work. This is why Jesus said, go make disciples. That we would get to see this more and more and more and more. Remember, Jesus said that this would be for the glory of God and for the disciples' benefit and many others, that they would believe that God sent him. May Lineville Baptist Church be a church that's so full of the excitement of resurrection joy, not just at Easter, but every day, knowing that we've been called out of the grave, that Clay County, East Alabama, and the very ends of the earth glorify God and believe that he has called us and them out of the grave. May it be so in our day, in our time, for God's glory. May sooner than later we get to baptize again, as we have got to see all fall long. Jody's kept the water in it for weeks. We've got one that we're waiting on and a couple more that are still being discipled through this, but Jesus is still calling other people out of the grave, and may we get to witness it. And may we get to demonstrate it by filling this pool up and stirring these waters and seeing these baptized into the family of God as a testimony that he called them out of the grave. May it be so. Jesus knows, Jesus cares, Jesus calls. And the last one, just to sum up the whole chapter. Jesus comforts. The ministry of Jesus in those 3 years did so much to reconnect the people of God to their God. Do you notice what Jesus did very much of? Don't miss this. Because I pray that Lineville Church would become more and more a place that looks like her Lord Jesus. You know how many synagogues there were throughout the Middle East back then? Lots. I don't know the number. I don't know how we could ever figure that out. But there were lots. Just like there are lots of churches everywhere, right? You can go in walking distance and find plenty of churches from where we sit right now. Jesus didn't call people to go to church. He called them to new life. Jesus didn't care for people by saying, dress like me, talk like me, live like me. He cared for them and transformed them through his love. Jesus doesn't just know about the problems, although he does know. He acted on them. And Jesus comforted, this last observation, the people all around him. I don't want to steal his thunder, but Dustin's going to read a pretty great story to y'all when he preaches on Sunday. I'm excited about it. It's a beautiful story, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So you got to be here to hear it. It's another example of Jesus doing this right here, comforting his people. Do you remember when Jesus found the woman caught in adultery? He did all of these same things could apply right here too. He knew what she had done. He called the people to account there. He cared enough to kneel in the dust and dirt beside her, and he comforted her. We could apply these truths to everything we see in Jesus' ministry. So you know what that means? We should apply them to the way we carry out Jesus' ministry today. Does that make sense? Jesus comforted people with the knowledge of who he was and the ministry of what he was doing among them. May you and I comfort each other. Paul said to the Thessalonians after talking about the return of the Lord, he says, therefore, comfort one another with these words. There is a name I love to hear. Did y'all ever sing that? I love to sing its worth. It sounds like music in my ears, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Why? Because he first loved me. Dear ones, may we take from this not only what Jesus has done for us, but all that Jesus wants to do through us and in us. And let us see the comfort he offers and call all who see us to come to the Jesus who is so sweet to us. Father, may it be for your sake, for your glory. Lord, remind us of your great love that you've poured out among us through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. Bind us up in it, establish us firmly in it, and draw others into it that we may celebrate new life in the one who gives life. In Jesus' name.